Good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar, Approaches to Forecasting New Products. My name is James Berry, and I'll be the moderator today. Eric Stellwagen will be presenting the webinar, which will start in a few moments. First, I wanted to take some time to go over a few of the technical aspects of the webinar itself. The webinar will run approximately 45 minutes. We'll save 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A session. During the webinar, you can submit questions using the control panel on your screen at any time. I'll be monitoring these questions throughout the webinar and compile a list for the final 15 minutes. We will also take questions submitted during the Q&A session itself. We will try to address as many questions as possible. If we do not get to your question during the Q&A session, we'll send you a personal email after the webinar has concluded. One final note. After the conclusion of the webinar, we'll be providing you with links to the slides used during the session, so look for an email on Friday of this week. We'll also be taping the webinar, and we'll email you a link when the recording is available to you, hopefully sometime next week. Thank you for your time, and now here's Eric Stellwagen with Approaches to Forecasting New Products.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us for our webinar. As James mentioned, my name is Eric Stellwagen. I am the Vice President and a co-founder of a company called Business Forecast Systems. We develop and market the Forecast Pro product line, and we also provide consulting services and training in the area of business forecasting. I've been working in forecasting for a long time. I started in this field in 1984 at an engineering firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we were developing forecasting software for the electric power industry. In 1986, I left that company and with a partner actually, founded Business Forecast Systems, and where we developed the Forecast Pro software line. Over the years, I've provided training and consulting services to literally hundreds of companies, ranging from large multinationals with tens of thousands of employees like Coca-Cola and Merck to small manufacturing companies with less than 200 employees. And this has provided me with a great deal of insight into how different corporations address the forecasting process. And it's allowed me to really understand the kinds of challenges that organizations grapple with. And this is important because forecasting is a lot more than just the application of statistical methods to data. It's a real important component is really understanding how to approach the problem and what works. And it's this blending of sort of empirical knowledge about what works with methodology that makes for a successful forecaster. Here's a roadmap of how we're going to spend the next hour. We're going to be talking about new product forecasting, obviously. And that phrase, new product forecasting, really covers a lot of ground. For example, when Apple launched the iPad, it was launching a new product. And prior to that launch, it had to forecast demand for the iPad. This product is what I would call a new-to-the-world company. It really didn't have similar products on the market, and it's one of the most difficult kinds of new product forecasting is to forecast demand for something that's truly new to the world. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have something like Procter & Gamble. They have a brand of toothpaste called Crest. And last week, I went into the CVS pharmacy next door to my office here to buy a tube of Crest. And when I got to the aisle, I looked at it, and there must have been 20 different types of Crest toothpaste on that shelf. So there were different size tubes, there was pastes and gels, some had whitening, some were regular flavors, some were cinnamon, some had plaque control. And Procter & Gamble was offering, again, probably upwards of 20 different SKUs or 20 different varieties of Crest toothpaste. And they're constantly changing what they offer. So if we come out with a new and improved version of Crest toothpaste, this is a new product, and Procter & Gamble is going to have to forecast it. They'll probably give it a different SKU number, and again, we're going to have something with a very short history. So both the iPad and the latest version of Crest are new products, and both need to be forecasted. However, they're very different types of new products, and the kinds of approaches that we'll use is going to vary a great deal. So the structure of this presentation is really to talk about different types of new products and to explore the approaches that we use to the different types. So we'll be looking at things like replacement products and product line extensions, things that are new to the company, and things that are new to the world. We'll be weaving in examples throughout the presentation, and we'll leave some time at the end for some questions and answers as well. So let's get started, and let's think about the different types of new products that we're going to be talking about. The first one is a replacement product. So we come out with a new and improved version, and we're going to discontinue the old one. And so now when someone goes in to purchase, they're going to discover that there's a new and improved version. It's going to have, again, a different SKU number. It needs to be forecasted, but it's replacing an old one. And that's one type of new product. Another type would be product line extensions. So, for instance, I work for a food and beverage company, and perhaps one of our products comes with, historically, we've had 4 different flavors. And we're going to introduce a couple of new ones. So going forward, we'll have 6 flavors to forecast. It's not a replacement product. It's really a product line extension. We're expanding our offerings, and it's another type of new product. And we'll be exploring how to approach product line extensions. New to the company. Okay, the company is going to be entering a new market. So, for example, let's say that historically we've been selling soap, okay, and we've had bar soaps and dish soaps, and that's what our product line has consisted of. And now we're going to launch a new line of laundry detergent. So we've never sold laundry detergent before, so it's new to us. On the other hand, it's not new to the market. There are other players in that market, and they have the market's established. So we're entering an area that's new to the company, but not new to the world. And of course, that is our next category, which is new to the world. So we've invented something truly new. We work for Apple. We invented the iPad. And this is the most challenging type of new product to forecast because there's really not a lot of information here. There's not information about what we've sold in the past. There's not information about similar products, and there's not information, say, competitive information about other companies and their offerings that are going to be directly relevant. So of the different types of new product forecasts that we're going to look at, grappling with new-to-world products is definitely the hardest of the 4 we've enumerated here. As I've mentioned previously, the type of new product you are forecasting or trying to forecast will often dictate the approach that should be used and considered. So let's take a peek at our first category, which is replacement products and product line extensions. We'll use the Crest toothpaste as an example. A replacement product, let's say that we have regular flavored Crest toothpaste in a 6.5 ounce tube, and we're going to replace it with a new and improved flavor. It's also going to be in a 6.5 ounce tube. It'll get a new SKU number, and once we launch that new and improved version, the old one will be discontinued. So it's a straight replacement product. And when we are considering it, we have to think a little bit like our consumers. If I go in there to buy a tube of Crest, and I discover that there's a new and improved version, I'll buy the new and improved version. In some ways, it's a continuation of the older product. So yes, it's a new product, but there's a strong relationship here. And you'll want to leverage the data that exists for the preceding products. Okay. So how do we approach this? Well, one thing we can do is to use judgment and to use market research. Judgment and market research are always going to be important, and it'll be useful in all of our different categories. When we're working with new products, market research often allows us to do things like define the size of the market and the market share of the various competitors. Judgment is always part of forecasting. Sometimes there are formalized approaches approaches to adding judgment, such as the Delphi method and others. Often these formalized approaches try to remove some of the bias in politics that can result when a group of people try to create a judgmental forecast. So market research and judgment are important. They can add value to new product forecasting. We're not going to explore them in any real depth in this webinar because we're going to concentrate more on specific forecasting techniques per se. So again, as we look at our first category, replacement products and product line extensions, one of the things we can do is judgment and market research. Another one is what we call item supersession. Sometimes people refer to this as mapping product histories. And it's a very simple idea and a very useful one. So basically what we're going to do is create what you might call a forecast history. That is a data set that we're going to use to apply a statistical method, forecasting method, like say exponential smoothing or Box-Jenkins to. So the new product may not have any history yet, or the history may be very short, and the idea is that we're going to combine this with history from predecessor products to allow us a longer history where we can use a forecasting method. So for a replacement product, this might be very simple. You might be just merging the history from the old product with the new and using that as the new forecast history for the new product. If what we have is product line extensions, if we have some products that are being phased out over time and others being phased in, and perhaps we're phasing out 3 and phasing in 5 new ones, then more complex mapping may be necessary than just a straight replace the history with the predecessor. But the concept here, again, is very simple. We look at the different products, we look at the history we have, and we construct a forecast history that we feel is a relevant demand stream to capture the demand for the current products. So let's look on the slide at just a very simple example of this. We have an old product, it's been discontinued, so that's shown here, and we've launched a new one as well. Okay, so we have some history for the new product. And notice that the old product and the new product have a period where they overlap. Okay, and here this is a replacement product. It was phased out and the new product was phased in. And what we want to do is to merge that history and create a single forecast history, which again is the combination of the two. This gives us more data length and the ability to apply statistical methods, things again like exponential smoothing or Box-Jenkins or other approaches, whereas with the new product, because of the short amount of historic data available, we wouldn't be able to apply those kinds of methods. So item supersession or product mapping is one approach to handling replacement products and product line extensions, and it's a very commonly used one and can be very useful. Another approach is top-down forecasting, and the idea here is also pretty straightforward. But the idea is that we have new products and we have predecessor products and product line extensions, and all of them fall into some sort of a product group. So we're about to look at an example, and in the example we'll look at sales of cough syrup, and we have different SKUs, different size bottles, different flavors, and it's an example where there's lots of replacement products and product line extensions. So at the lowest level, we have items that are coming and going, but at the group level, we have a good deal of consistency. So let's take a look at how this works. And before we jump into the example, I'll just make a comment here about the group level data. The idea with top-down forecasting is to concentrate at the group level. And the group level data is going to be higher volume. It's also going to have usually more structure, and higher volume and more structure usually means easier to forecast. And if we have replacement products and product line extensions, the group level data is going to have a longer history than the new products. And all of these things are good in terms of our ability to forecast. So let's take a look at the example. Here it is. All the data I'm going to be showing you today is actually, with one exception, is real, but this one's certainly real. It's sales, again, of cough syrup. It's different size bottles and different flavors. we're looking at the group level data, and we have about 3 years worth of history. It's obviously very seasonal stuff, and again, at this level, pretty easy to work with. Now we're going to go to the lowest level. So this is an individual SKU. It went into that group total. It's also a discontinued product. So this product has been replaced. And in fact, all the ones in gray, which I'm walking through now, these are all old products. We need them because they go into the group total, but they've been replaced with newer ones. Here's our first live one. So this is a very important product. We've got 8 or 9 months worth of history, and in fact most of our active products have very short histories. Here's one with only 2 months, for example. So this is what I want to forecast, and there's different ways I can go about it. We're going to be talking about top-down approaches, and before I show you what top-down does, I'm going to contrast it with what's called bottom-up. So if I simply take this short history and forecast it, I'm going to end up with something very simple. In this case, a flat line. So I'd probably use simple exponential smoothing or something like that. And we can see a lot of these forecasts for the very short items, because they're very short, have generated some very simple forecasts. If I look at the group, I have a truly bad forecast at the group level. Keep in mind, we did not forecast this green line. We went bottom up, so we forecasted the different SKUs and we added them together to get this horrible forecast that we'd probably lose our job over. So what do? Well, we're going to go top down. So I'm going to add a top down modifier here. And you can see that the forecast changes dramatically. And what the top down is doing is forecasting the green line directly. So we're forecasting based on this group level data, and we get a very reasonable forecast. Now if I go down to the lower levels, they've been adjusted so that they sum to that upper level forecast, and we have reasonable forecasts where before we had straight lines. Now we have forecasts that reflect the kind of variation which was very evident at the group level. So this is called a top-down approach. Again, the idea is we're working at a group level where we can get a better forecast, and then we're applying it or forcing it down to the lower levels. Again, higher volume at the group level, more structure, more data length, easier to forecast. The slide has some details about how you do it. You actually forecast at the group, then you forecast at the lower levels, and then you do a reconciliation between the two using proportionality. So pretty straightforward. And for those who are interested in learning more, we actually, forecasting a product hierarchy was the subject of one of our previous webinars. And we're going to actually make all of our webinars available at forecastpro.com for sort of playing on demand, so to speak. And that should be up and running in a couple of weeks. So if you do want to learn more about top-down approaches and forecasting a product hierarchy, I would encourage you to visit the website and run that webinar because it goes into more depth. So we've looked at replacement products, product line extensions, and now we're going on to our second category of or type of new products, which is new to the company. So when we're forecasting products that are new to the company, obviously, by definition, we don't have internal data. External data may or may not be available, though. So we may not have, again, our own data, but we may be able to get competitive information on similar products in the market. So how do we go about this new to company? Well, judgment and market research certainly can play a role. So that's going to be true of all of our categories. An approach called forecasting by analogy. Some people refer to this kind of forecasting as looks-like analysis. Can also be used, and that's what we're gonna explore now. So when you forecast by analogy, what you do is you make an assumption that the initial demand pattern for the new product is going to look very similar or have the same shape as a product that you deem to be similar. It could be, again, a specific product that you feel is a good analogy for the new product, or you might create a shape, create a launch profile, perhaps by averaging over different products that you feel might be similar. This method can be used with historic demand, so if we have some history on the new product, we can use it. It can also be used before we have launched the product. So even if we have no history, we can still use this approach. We're going to show an example in a moment. Before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about this concept of a launch profile or an analogy series. On this slide, what I want you to do is just look at the graph. This is the shape that we feel the new product is going to have when we launch it. So you can see there's a good bit of growth initially. Perhaps this is a pipeline fill of some sort, and then it'll come down, and then it'll go into some sort of standard behavior. So perhaps this was a product we deemed to be similar, and here was the series, shown here in column B. From the series, we can calculate things like percentages. What does each period represent in terms of a percentage of the total? We can also do things like notice that in the first 3 months for this analogy series, we sold 31.8% of the total of the 12-month total. So we can calculate relative percentages and cumulative percentages, and this is actually going to be important because this is what the forecasting by analogy uses to build the forecast. So let's launch into our example. We're going to start with an example where we have no history. Okay, so the product has not launched yet. And we're starting off with kind of a clean slate here. We've got a forecast of 0. The first thing we're going to do is to specify an analogy series, which is the one I showed you on the spreadsheet. So our forecast now has the same shape going forward. The other question is, how much are we going to sell? And let's say our market research leads us to believe that during the first 12 months, I'm going to sell 20,000 units. So basically, I'm going to have two concepts here. There's what I would call a launch total, which is I expect to sell 20,000 units, and a launch horizon, which is the period during which I expect to sell that total, which in this case is during the first 12 months. So if I have no data, then I need to supply this launch total, or the amount I expect to sell, over a given period of time. And from that and the analogy series, I can then generate a forecast going forward, which is precisely what we've done. Okay, so our forecast will have the same shape, and it will sum to our launch total, in this case, the 20,000 unit figure. Okay, so this example is when we have no data. Now things get a little more interesting as you get some data. So let's look at the same example, but sort of 3 months later. Okay, so 3 months have gone by since we launched the product, and the green line here is what we've sold. So over the first 3 months, in this particular example, we sold 5,000 units. Now, we can at this point say to ourselves, okay, we sold 5,000 units in 3 months. According to our analogy series, that represents roughly 32% of total sales over the 12 months. And we can use those percentages to calculate what we'll call the estimated launch total. How much will we sell in 12 months if we continue to sell at the rate we've been selling the first 3 months? And that total here is about 15,700. Okay, so our estimated launch total from the data we have is 15,700. That's a good bit less than the 20,000 that we were anticipating before we launched the product. So one nice thing about using this method is that as the data start to come in, we can compare it to our estimates of before we started and see how we're tracking. And I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to, on this display, I'm going to put in the 20,000 we had originally estimated. And what that'll show graphically is that in order to make that 20,000 goal, we'd have to really sell very aggressively compared to what we've been doing thus far. So we're really kind of undershooting what we expected to sell, and it probably would be wise for us to revisit that assumption of 20,000 units in the first 12 months and revise it downward. So perhaps we'll let the data do the talking and go with, say, 15,700, which seems to be what we're tracking on currently. So the main concept here, though, is that we're using forecasting by analogy. It's assuming, again, an initial demand pattern is going to be similar to a demand pattern that we've created or a launch profile that we've created. We've seen two examples, one where we had no history and one where we did. When we don't have history, if we want to forecast by analogy, we're going to have to come up with an initial estimate of the total we're going to sell over a given period of time. So as the slide says, the launch total, the amount we're going to sell over the launch horizon, in our example, over the first 12 months. If we have history, then we can estimate these directly from the series using the percentages. Okay? So a very straightforward method, but a very useful one. So again, we're looking at techniques for forecasting things that are new to the company, judgment and market research, forecasting by analogy. Another option is what we call assumption-based models. And an assumption-based model, I'm going to sort of illustrate this just in Excel, actually. And let me bring up an Excel sheet. Here's a very simple example of an assumption-based model. The concept is that we lay out some assumptions. In this case, my example is we're developing a new drug, and we have an assumption that the development cost for that new drug will be $30 million. We have a second assumption that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the probability they'll approve this new drug if we develop it is 75%. We have an assumption that the patient population for this drug is 500,000, and that our market share when we launch this product will be 35%. Our fifth assumption here is that the cost for this therapy will be $600 per year per patient, and that our cost for filling that is $10 a year. So these are all assumptions. And in an assumption-based model, we list out the assumptions that we're making, and then we tie them together into a forecast. So the first year profit and loss, in this very simple example, takes our assumptions and combines them, in this case just using a little bit of arithmetic, to come up with our forecast for the first year profit or loss. And according to this assumption-based model, that first year profit should be $47 million after we launch the product. We also have subsequent years. They're also tied together with a formula. And the subsequent year profit is here at $77 million. So before I undertake the development, we sit down and we work out our assumptions and we come up with a forecast. Now we start the development, and periodically we're going to have to revisit all of our assumptions in light of new information. So let's say that the development is taking longer than we anticipated. So we're 6 months into the process, and now we believe that a more realistic expectation for the development cost is not $30 million, but perhaps $90 million. So I'm going to put in $90 million, and when I do so, you'll notice that our forecasts change. Okay, so now our first year forecast, which had been predicted at $47 million in profit, is now showing a $12 million loss. Now what's important here is when we change the forecast, we never change the forecast in an assumption-based model directly. What we're doing is changing the assumptions and seeing how those changes in assumptions change the forecast. So in this case, again, we change our assumption on the development cost, and it changes the forecast. Let's say the process continues for a while, and now we're at the point where we started clinical trials on the new drug. And maybe those trials aren't going so well. And now we revisit our assumptions and we say, you know what, this assumption of 75% doesn't seem realistic anymore. And in fact, I think probably, you know, we're looking at closer to 25%. So I'll put that in there. And furthermore, there seems to be some side effects. So our assumption that our market share would be 35%, we're going to downgrade that as well. And now we think it's probably closer to 15%. And as I change these assumptions, again, our forecast for the first year profit and subsequent year's profit changes rather dramatically. And now, as we look at our new forecast and we notice we're on course to according to the model, to lose a great deal of money in the first year, 78 million, and make much more modest returns than originally thought in subsequent years. And perhaps the company at this point would cancel the project and stop development on the drug based on this, again, assumption-based modeling. So the example I'm using is obviously a very, very simple example. It's really meant to give you a feel for the procedure. A real example would have much finer grain assumptions. It probably wouldn't be done on a spreadsheet, although it might be. I've seen people do assumption-based modeling where they use simulation software. So rather than just a formula in Excel, you might assign probability distributions to the various assumptions and model them a little more explicitly. It also is very common to have checkpoints that are defined as part of this process. Some people call these gates, but the idea is that it is known a priori that at given times during this development process, we're going to sit down, revisit all the assumptions, and revise our forecasts and make decisions on to whether to continue or not. So again, assumption-based modeling is another one of our methods here for new to the company products. It's often used for products with long development cycles where you're really kind of making decisions as to whether to continue or not. The forecast is a direct result of the assumptions you make. So we're tying the assumptions and we're quantifying the relationships between the assumptions and the forecasts. The assumptions are subject to periodic review and, when appropriate, to revision. And so again, we revisit the assumptions as conditions change and revise our forecast. And the forecasts are not modified directly. This is an important tenet of assumption-based modeling. So it's not the case where the boss comes in and says, I want that forecast to be 40 million in the first year. The answer is, well, what are the underlying assumptions? And if the assumptions change, then the forecasts change. But again, it's a way of formalizing the relationships between the assumptions that you're making and the forecasts. Okay, so in terms of new to company approaches, judgment, market research, forecasting by analogy, assumption-based models. Another approach is market share forecasting. Okay, a fairly straightforward idea, but I am going into something that is new to the company. So we have not been in this market before, and therefore I would imagine we do a fair amount of market research to define the size of the market and the different players, and to try to figure out what our market share might be when we enter. So we tend to be focusing on, again, market share as opposed to how many units are we going to sell. And the market research becomes rather important. So, and there's some help here depending on your industry. So there's plenty of market research groups. There's also data providers, things like AC Nielsen and IRI, who provide scanner data. So if you're in consumer packaged goods or food and beverage, you can get a feel for what are the sizes of the markets, what are the different players, and what are their market shares. In the pharmaceutical world, IMS is a similar kind of company with the prescription data. But again, oftentimes through market research, we can get considerable insight into the size of the market and the composition of the different players involved. Once we have a market share forecast, translating that into, say, a unit demand forecast is usually pretty straightforward. We know the size of the market, we know our expected share, and based on that, we can back into the forecast that we need. So again, at times with new products, sometimes you'll be focusing more on market share than on specific unit demand. Okay, and this brings us to our last category that we'll talk about today, which is new to the world. Okay, so new to the world products. As I've mentioned previously, this is the most challenging of all the different types because of the lack of information on similar products. What are our approaches? Well, some of our old friends are here. Judgment and market research, forecasting by analogy, assumption-based models, and a new one, diffusion models. So many of the methods that we would be using for new to company also apply to new to world, And now we have another class of models, which is something called diffusion models. And the best known of the diffusion models is something called the Bass model. It was developed by a market research guru, Frank Bass, to forecast how new technology or new products diffuse in the marketplace, how they disseminate outwards. So let's consider this for a second. The diffusion models are, some people refer to them as S-curve models, and the reason they refer to them that way is that when you look at the cumulative sales demand, it often takes the form of sort of this elongated S, okay? And the idea is, again, we're looking at cumulative sales, that as you launch a new product and people start to adopt it, you have a period of growth, and then at some point you hit an inflection point where the growth starts to slow down and you start to saturate your market and it levels out. So most diffusion models are so-called S-curves, and we sort of think of them again as this kind of stretched out or elongated S. And the Bass model in particular we will talk about. It's used to forecast first-time adoptions of new-to-the-world products. So we're not interested in replacement products. What we're really interested in is how is this new product, this new-to-the-world product, how's it being adopted? And the model sort of bases this on two types of purchasers, or two types of adopters. One is what we call early adopters, or innovators. These are individuals who like to adopt new technology early. So these are the types of people in the extreme form. They're the ones that camp out overnight in front of, you know, the Apple store to be the very first one to get the iPad in their neighborhood. Okay, so that some people enjoy adopting new technology, and they adopt it early. Another set of people are what we call imitators, and they're more driven by word of mouth. They're the types that really want to know that this new product works well, that that people enjoy having it, and they are, as more and more people adopt the method of the new technology, we're likely to get more and more imitators as again the word spreads that this is a good product. So the model assumes two types of adopters: innovators or early adopters, people who like to adopt new technology, and imitators, people who are sort of a more wait and see types. The Bass model can be used with or without historic demand data. So we can use it prior to the launch of the new product. We can also use it afterwards. We'll see an example very shortly. And what we'll also see is that it requires three parameters to be used. And there's something called the coefficient of innovation, which is really has to do with the rate that early adopters adopt. The coefficient of imitation, which has to do with the rate at which the imitators adopt. And finally, the total number of potential adopters, or the total size of the potential market. So to build this model requires these three numbers or coefficients, and this can either be done through, if we have historic data, by fitting it to the demand that we do have. There's also, this is a well-known model in the market research literature, and there's a considerable amount of research that's been done on it, including publishing coefficients for different types of technologies. What are these adoption rates that have occurred for different types of technology? So let's go into an example here, and for the Bass model. And we're going to start off, again, when we have no data. So we've got a forecast of 0. And because we have no data, we're going to have to put in our different rates. So the first one is our innovation rate. We're going to set that, let's say that according to the market research literature, a similar product or a product in a similar technology sector had an innovation rate of 0.05 and an imitation rate of, let's say, 0.41. Okay, so I'll put those numbers in there. And again, our market research leads us to believe that the total demand for this will be about 1 million units. So I'll put that in as well. And the BAS model, given these coefficients, will generate a forecast. In this case, I'm looking at the cumulative demand for this product, which has not yet been launched, based on, again, the coefficients that we've provided. So this is cumulative demand. I can also look at it on a, in this case, year-by-year basis, where, again, we've got the adoptions are growing. They get to sort of a place where it turns, and then we have the decay as we saturate our market. So usually when we're dealing with the BAS model or other diffusion models, we're looking at cumulative graphs, but obviously it's an easy piece of arithmetic to simply view it either way you want. So this is the case where we have no data, and we're in a position where we need to come up with these model parameters, and we're likely doing it from similar products that we've built BAS models for, or from similar technologies where these coefficients are published. Let's say that we're partially into our launch. We've got 6 years worth of data. Now we have enough data that rather than having to supply these numbers, we can estimate them directly from the data. And so now we're again 6 years into our launch. Here's the model based on the data that we have. If I show it in terms of unit demand, it's a little easier to see. We've got our 6 years worth of history, and this is how we're tracking this model currently. So by fitting this to the data, I know it's probably hard to see on your screens here because it's kind of in gray, but our initial total demand seems to be about 888,000, a reasonable amount shy of our original estimate of 1 million. The coefficients are similar to what we had, but again, a bit of variation there as well. So the main thing I want to get across here is that the BAS model is really specifically designed to capture different types of adopters of new technology. It's used for new-to-world forecasting, and again, a well-known technique with a track record and a lot of documentation in the literature. So that sort of concludes our tour of the different types of new products and the types of approaches that one takes. Obviously, in a short webinar like this, my goal is to expose you to some of these ideas. There are other methods as well, which we have not gone into. But again, my goal is to give you an overview of some of the more common approaches. So a couple of summary points here. The type of new product will often dictate our approach. So, you know, if we are dealing with things like replacement products and product line extensions, we're using different methods than if we're doing something that's new to the world. Judgment and market research play an important role. This is always true with new product forecasting. When forecasting replacement products and or product line extensions, we're going to use methods that leverage the data that we have for preceding products or predecessor products. So again, as a demand stream, the demand for the predecessor products is directly relevant, and we're going to use methods that capture that. So things like item supersession, mapping the product histories, or top-down forecasting, where again we're using the history for the predecessor products as part of our forecasting for the new ones. When forecasting new to company or new to world products, usually what we're going to try to do is leverage experience with similar products. They may be similar products of our own, that our own organization has been selling, or they might be similar products that other organizations are selling. But again, techniques like forecasting by analogy, diffusion models, these are methods which allow you to leverage experience with similar products. Okay. And then this slide, you don't need to jot this down because we'll be sending out the slide sets. But this is a reference book. It's called New Product Forecasting, an Applied Approach. It was written by Ken Kahn, who's a pretty well-known new product forecasting guru. and it's written to be very accessible to the practitioner. It covers all of the models that we've been talking about during this webinar, as well as others. So if you are looking for a text to give you some ideas on new product forecasting, this is one that I would recommend. So at this point, I do want to, we'll be opening up for questions very shortly, but before I do that, I do want to say just a couple of things about some of the products and services that my company offers. And one of the things that we do is we hold seminars and product training workshops. We do this in a variety of formats. The seminars are usually held either as on-site classes. We can come to your company. We can also do public courses where we rent meeting space in a hotel and people sign up to come. The seminars are usually 2 days if we go on site and 3 days for public classes. And they cover all sorts of different forecasting methods. They explain how they work and how to apply them. And we use a lot of real-world examples to illustrate the different approaches. If we come on site, we can use your data as well. That always makes it more interesting. We also offer product training workshops where the emphasis is not so much on the methods, but rather how do we use the Forecast Pro software. We do these on site, and we do these as public classes as well. We also offer remote-based training, which is actually a format that's becoming very popular. We're doing a lot of remote-based training these days. And remote-based is delivered via WebEx with a live instructor. It can range from anything from, say, a 4-hour quick start to using Forecast Pro to a full-blown training class spread out over a number of days. So we can be very flexible on what we offer in terms of seminars and workshops. And if this is of interest, by all means, visit our website to learn more and contact us if you have questions. The presentation today was using the Forecast Pro software. And obviously, if you want to learn more about Forecast Pro, we'd be very happy to tell you all about it. So if you are interested in learning more, one nice way or a good way to learn more about Forecast Pro is to get a live demo of it, which again we deliver over WebEx. And if you'd like to have a demonstration, we can also incorporate your data. And to request one, you can actually, if you want, you can send us in the form of a question right now. During the webinar, you can let us know that you'd like a demonstration. We'll have a sales associate contact you. Alternatively, there's a lot of good information about our products on the website, including some video tours, as well as downloadable product brochures and other information. So I'd encourage you, if you are interested in learning more about Forecast Pro, to visit our website. So at this point, we're going to turn this over for some questions. And again, if you've submitted a question that does not get answered live, don't worry. We will be responding to all questions received either by email or phone, as the case may be. But let's start with a question or two. So the first question here I've just been handed. In item supersession, how do you handle the overlap period of the old and the new item? Okay. Now, in our example, we had an overlap, and I like so many things in forecasting, the answer is going to be it depends a little bit. If we have a direct replacement product, so it's a one-to-one relationship, we have an old product, it was phased out over time, and a new version of it was phased in, then typically what we're going to do there is merge the history. During the phase-in, phase-out period, so if I'm trying to forecast right at the moment that I'm phasing in and phasing out, there's going to be a fair amount of judgment involved. So I can create a complete history by merging the two, and then I'm going to forecast forward, but the fact that I'm in the transition period makes things a little harder. After the transition period has occurred, things are much easier. So again, in a straight transition between old and new, we're merging products' histories. If it's more complex than that, if we're talking about product line extensions where some are being phased out, maybe a different number are being phased in, then you need to use your assessment of how the demand is changing. I have seen approaches where people will map the predecessor products, a certain fraction of it, into some of the new products. But the key here is you're creating a forecast history, and you need to think it through and then create a history which you feel creates a relevant demand stream for the new products you're trying to forecast. So let's look at a next question here. Do you have a recommended book on new product forecasting? Okay, well, funny you should ask that, because I did have a slide on that. So again, this is a book by Ken Kahn. It's called New Product Forecasting, an Applied Approach. It is, I would say, an overview designed for the business practitioner, and that would be my recommendation on a book on new product forecasting. As is always the case, there's lots of resources on the internet as well on all of the different methods that people employ for new product forecasting. So that's always a good place to look. Okay. Okay. There's another question here. There's a question of what about models for retail sales for new products? I would say there are different approaches, and forecasting retail sales is often, depending on what level of detail you want to get at, is often more challenging than total sales as say the manufacturer of the product. There are some retail models. There's one of the names in this field is Peter Fader. He's at the Wharton School of Econometrics, and he does a lot of spreadsheet-based, I would call them assumption-based models for retail, where again it's very carefully worked out assumptions and relationships between the two. I don't claim to be an expert on retail models. I would direct you to a literature search. Again, I have seen presentations by Peter Fader, which I was pretty impressed with, and there are also consulting firms that specialize on retail models as well. Do we have additional questions? Okay. Okay, this will be, I guess, our last question before we conclude. And there's a question about how do you handle cannibalization of existing products when you launch a new product. So this is a very common dilemma. I launch a new product, and it has a cannibalization. It takes some of the sales away from my existing products. So how do we approach this? I would say a couple of different ways. And again, like all things, you need to know the context. If something is a product line extension, so I am really, again, say I'm selling soft drinks and I'm coming out with a couple of new flavors. So historically I've had Coke and Diet Coke and caffeine-free Coke, and now I'm coming out with a different flavor, a root beer or something like that. It's very logical to assume that when I launch these new flavors that it will cannibalize some existing sales. If something is pure cannibalization, so that you're not really increasing overall sales, you're just moving it around between products, then the top-down approach would be a very reasonable one. So what we think of is there's total demand for soft drinks. The fact that as we're changing the mix-up or the flavors, that it changes the mix that people buy. By forecasting at that group level, we can capture that total demand. So top-down forecasting is definitely one way of doing it. On the other hand, chances are you're launching new products not in an effort to move demand around, but rather to steal some demand from competitors. So the hope is that it won't be a straight cannibalization, but rather it will be some cannibalization, but will also be stealing sales from competitors. And I would say in that instance, then in addition to sort of top-down approaches, you might start looking at market share. Because what you're really talking about is we're extending what we offer in an effort to capture additional market share and take sales away from some of our competitors. So again, as always, you need to fit the approach with the specific circumstances. but a lot of the methods that we've been looking at today would be relevant as well. So, okay, we'll take one more question here before we conclude. I've been told there's been a fair amount of questions having to do with new product models in Forecast Pro. We always get a lot of Forecast Pro users at these webinars, and some of you have noticed that there's some new stuff in there. I was using Forecast Pro XE version 6, which is a product that was launched last month. It does include new product forecasting. It includes item supersession. It includes forecasting by analogy. It includes the BAS model. It includes the ability to forecast items with no demand history and to do so judgmentally. So there's a whole array of new product forecasting approaches that have been built into Forecast Pro XE. Forecast Pro Unlimited and Forecast Pro Track will also be in a future release that will occur in the not too distant future. We'll also be incorporating new product forecasting. So again, it's our foray into new product forecasting in terms of the products is relatively new, but it will be continuing. So currently, I've been using Forecast Pro XE for this webinar, and in the not too distant future, these models will be supported both in Forecast Pro Unlimited and in Track as well. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for attending. I hope that you've learned a few things and that you've enjoyed it. And our webinar series will continue, and you'll all be notified of our next one, and I hope you can join us there as well. So thanks again.